at this time. Oh, sorry. And we'll have an interactive question and answer session towards the end. So feel free to raise your hand and ask your question or type it in the chat and we'll gladly ask it for you. Just as a reminder, this will be recording. And after the discussion, Ashley was gracious enough to send us 2 signed copies of the books, which we'll be raffling off. So please stick around. So it is my pleasure now to introduce to you Ashley Audrain. Ashley's debut novel, The Push, was New York Times, Sunday Times, and #1 international bestseller, and was a Good Morning America's Book Club pick. It's being translated into 36 languages, and a limited television series is currently in development. Ashley previously worked as a publicity director of Penguin Books Canada, and prior to that, she worked in public relations. She lives in Toronto, where she and her partner are raising their 2 young children. She's working on her 2nd novel. Thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us tonight from all the way to Toronto. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Pinki, and thank you to Sabine for having me. This is lovely to talk to you all, and thank you for joining me tonight to chat about the book. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, I thought I would just start by, for anyone who hasn't read the book, to just give you a summary of sort of what it's about, and then I can talk to you a bit about my inspiration behind writing it, and what that journey looks like, and then we can get into some questions. So the Push is about a woman named Blythe Connor, and she comes from a history of women who have struggled greatly with motherhood, her own mother and grandmother in particular. And she's determined that she's going to be different, that she's going to have a very different experience and be the very, warm, sort of present, engaged mother that she wishes she always had. And so she and her husband welcome a baby named Violet. But it is not long until she starts to realize, there is something wrong with Violet. She is quite a different little girl. She's very aloof and she is not attached to her. And she soon begins acting maliciously towards other children at preschool. And the problem, of course, is that, her husband, cannot see in Violet what she sees. He thinks this is very much a result of the maternal anxiety that she has struggled with for so long and this stress about motherhood that she has always carried. And so they try to move on as a family and they welcome another baby. And in that, second child, Blythe really finds that connection she's looking for that sort of satisfies, what she has always wanted, until something goes terribly wrong in the family and they're forced to take a look at, who Violet really is, who Blythe herself is, what has happened, and the family unravels from there, to put it mildly, I guess, for those of you who read it. So it, and it does, have this multi-generational piece to it where, we do get these glimpses into what life and motherhood and womanhood was like, for Blythe's mother and Blythe's grandmother, and the threads that sort of, carry through all of their experiences. So, a lot of people have said to me, what inspired this book? Like, where did this story come from? It admittedly is quite a dark story. It is quite a dark exploration of motherhood and the expectations of motherhood. And I think really, a lot of our common fears about motherhood. It's funny, I feel like, this is my first novel. And so this is all very new to me, sort of writing a book and putting it out in the world. And something I've really, that I can understand now, that I don't think I could really understand before is how the book starts to have different meaning for you once it is out, as the writer. It's sort of, once it is in the hands of readers, you start to have this wonderful experience, of hearing back from readers about what the book was to them. And you sort of see this idea or this piece of work that you've done reflected back to you in the eyes of other people. And for me, that has sort of changed kind of what the book is and how I see it and how I understand it. And something that I've really come to understand about the book that I couldn't really see at the time is that it really is, an exploration of fear, I think, fear attached to motherhood. And I can see that in Poor Blythe, this main character, I sort of just gave her, all of these core fears about motherhood, all at once that happened for her. The exploration of what happens when you can't connect with a child. And also maybe even worse, what happens when you don't like your child, or you can't trust who they are, or you're uncomfortable with who that person is in the world, that you are responsible for and what you owe them. And of course, it's also an exploration of, I think, every parent's worst fear, which, explores grief and, loss and that as well, which is, something that I think every parent crosses every parent's mind. So yeah, so it is very much this exploration of fear. And so back to sort of my original point, which was, where did this come from, or this, the inspiration from the book. I had always been very interested in the idea of motherhood, motherhood as a concept, like long before I was ready to have children myself. And I remember it never came from this, want or desire to have children always, because I think for a long time I didn't know if that was something I wanted or if my life would go in that direction. But it always came from this curiosity about, why do women do it? Why do women decide to have children? And once they do, how does that change them? And how does it change their life and their identity? And those were always, I was always just had a heightened curiosity, I think, about that question or about that idea. And so looking back, it doesn't surprise me that the novel that I've written, covers that. But then when I did become a parent myself, when I had my son, it was my first child, I really saw firsthand, that huge difference between the way we are taught to think about motherhood and the things we are meant to say about it, and how we are meant to feel about it, compared to what that experience is really like for a lot of women. And how much we don't say, and why don't we feel, that we can say it, or why do we attach shame and guilt, to so many of the experiences in motherhood, um, and how that kind of looks through the generations. And so that really was where the idea for the story came from. I thankfully, nothing about this book is autobiographical, thankfully. But I did start writing it when my son was 6 months old. And so I was very much in the throes of new motherhood and exactly what that first year feels like. And, all my friends were also at that stage. We were all sort of having our first children at the same time. And so there was a lot to draw on, a lot of curiosities and a lot of, observations about life, and family that I think, did inspire some things in the book. So yeah, it was just sort of, I just really felt compelled around that time to be writing this story, be writing through this exploration around that time. And so that's sort of, I guess, the background on the book and kind of where the ideas came from, and, when the characters were sort of born. And I wrote for about 3 years, I would say, like working on the book for 3 years, on the draft for that long before I felt like it was ready to send out to agents. And then sort of started that whole process, which is always an interesting one, which, I can talk a bit more about later if anyone's interested. But yeah, and so that's the story behind the book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. Wow. Actually, you kind of answered my first question. This book, when I was reading it, I have 19 and 20-year-old kids.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
it took me back to that time. And like you said, it was like first, and I heard that, like you just mentioned, that you started writing this book when you had your son was 6 months old. Like when you're in that zone, brand new mother, you are already, your hormones are, so like, how do you're already vulnerable as a new mom. How do you go to this dark side of motherhood? Was that tough? Like, I know you did a little bit say that, but like, I cannot. Because I was a roller coaster of emotions during the first year of motherhood, and reading this book, as I said, when my kids are this adult, was tough. So how do you write and explore that side of motherhood when you are a brand new mother of 6 months old?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, now, I mean, to be honest, now when I look back, I mean, my son is 6 now, and I also have a daughter who's 3. And now when I look back, I think, like, I don't know, I don't really know how I found the energy then, because I feel like I barely have the energy now. Uh, but you know what I think? I think writing, and I think, I've heard other writers say this, and I really do feel this, that, writing can be quite cathartic, in that way of sort of working through the time in life that you're at. And I really felt that. I mean, my son, when he was born, a few weeks after he was born, he was quite ill. And he was like, we were at lived in the children's hospital for weeks on end, months on end, actually, finding out what was wrong and giving him a diagnosis and trying to get him healthy. And he was diagnosed with a chronic illness. And so there was a whole host of health issues in our life suddenly, and sort of learning how to be a mother while going through that, was very challenging. And and I think that there was a part of me that, I don't explore that in this book, but there was a part of me, I think, that really, found it almost quite therapeutic to be writing through a different journey, a different difficult, hard, dark journey of another woman. And I think that, yeah, I think that was part of it. Because even though this book, goes to some sort of, dark, hard places, I don't have a recollection of that being difficult to write about. And again, I think that there is something about, using writing as sort of a way to work through things, I think. And I also really just love to write. I mean, I really just, it is the thing that brings me, such joy and real purpose. And, I had felt that way long before, I had children, but I had never sat down to really try to write a novel. And, I think any mother, and you could probably agree with this, Pinky, that, when you have a child, I think especially for the first time, you feel like so much of you has changed, and you are suddenly giving so much away, to this wonderful new human. But nonetheless, you are giving so much of yourself, your time, your energy, your sleep, your, I mean, physical, everything. And I remember really feeling, I think especially around that 6-month mark or so, like, I had to protect something for myself. There needed to be one thing that I did hold on to and sort of protect fiercely. And to me, that was the joy of writing. I mean, that was the one thing that I could, leave the house for 2 hours and go and do, before I had to come back to feed again or nurse again or whatever it was. And so I think that also was part of it. It was that ritual of taking that time for myself to just really have my mind in a completely different place and feel, challenged creatively, felt very important to me at that time. So I think it was all of those things. I think that it then, didn't become so difficult. It became almost more of an outlet.
Okay. Wow. And when I was reading this book, uh, I, if I be honest, I had like a love-hate relationship with the book because it's such a tough subject, and it's
Yeah.
I couldn't connect in that way, nor do I want to get connected with what's happening in the book. But when you write this book as a second person, you put
Mm.
your readers right in the middle of what's happening. Like you cannot escape. It felt like you're just living in that moment. Like what compelled you to write this book in this type of subject in a second person? And was that like it just happened, or did you want, like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't really make, such a conscious choice to say I'm going to sit down and write this book in this hybrid second person. Because for anyone who hasn't read it yet, it's told, through the voice of Blythe, the main character, but she is speaking directly to somebody, and that somebody is her husband. And this, the whole book is really written as this sort of memoir or letter of sorts, to him, telling her side of the story about their relationship and their life and their marriage and their child. And so I didn't consciously set out to do that, but I think because when I did sit down, what I wanted to do was really tell this story, of this woman, but and motherhood, and this daughter. But I always saw it as being very tight, within the context of this marriage. I mean, it always was a story that really rested in marriage for me as well. And I think I wanted it to feel very intimate, and I wanted the reader to feel like they were right in the middle, of this relationship. And so I think that the voice just sort of came out that way. That was just exactly what it was from day one. And it wasn't until I was, I don't know how long, but like, pretty well into kind of writing scenes and figuring all this out and seeing that it was taking shape, that I thought, oh, like I am doing something a bit unusual here, and will this work? Because it's unusual. There's not a lot of books that are written that way, and I just went with it, and I did think that somewhere down the line somebody was probably going to try to talk me out of that, or tell me that it wasn't going to work, or it was not the right, but thankfully nobody ever did. And it just sort of worked. And so I stayed with it. Yeah. And I think it was just a way to feel even closer to her, even more for me to feel even more in the mind of her, and even more in the middle of this marriage. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I'm working on a second book right now, and it is all in third person and from multiple points of view, and it is such a different experience. Everything is different about it, and so I'm sort of learning how that feels now a little more. But I really loved writing in that second person hybrid voice. I loved feeling like you were smack dab in the middle of that relationship and you couldn't get out.
It worked. It definitely worked. So just, I want to pick up from what you just said. Fox, her husband's name.
Yeah.
That's a very unusual name. Is there any story behind it? Why you named him Fox?
There is not. And I see now that was quite there was something at work there in the back of my mind, I'm sure, that I just didn't recognize. But, I wanted to choose a name that was unusual and sort of short, and when I pick names for characters, I really just go with like a gut feeling. I don't overthink the names, and I've never chosen a name for a specific reason. It really is just a feel, and I sort of just rolled with it. And the names in this book have come up quite a bit, on a few different levels. Like a reader, well, I didn't realize this until a reader wrote to me to say this, but even the name Violet, is one letter away from being violent, which is quite fitting, and that I did not realize. So yeah, it's funny thinking about the names now. There are a few examples where people have reached out to me to say that the men in the book, almost all of the men in the book, have 3-letter names, and I did not realize that. And there was really nothing too funny about the names. There was one thing about the names, that this is not Fox's name, but Cecilia, her name. So this is the mother of Blythe. And it was funny because as I was writing her in the earlier drafts, I couldn't come up with the right name for her. So this is basically Violet's grandmother. I couldn't come up with the right name for her. And so as a placeholder, just so I could, have something that I was working with, I had given her the name of my grandmother, which is Sylvia, who has passed. And so I used her name just because I thought, well, it's going to be easy for me just to remember, Violet's grandmother is Sylvia. That's my grandmother's name. And I love that name. I've always loved that name. So I had that in as a placeholder, and, kept writing and thought I would change it at some point. And then quite late in the process, while I was going through, I think basically copy it, like we were quite far down the edits with the editors, the book was acquired, and we were, working on very late drafts. And then I thought, oh gosh, I've got to change this back, because I just thought I don't know if because it's not necessarily the kind of character you should name your wonderful grandmother after, because I do have a wonderful grandmother who's very maternal and not anything like Cecilia. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll just keep it because it's just in my mind, that's the character's name now. And so I thought, well, I probably should ask my mom just to make sure my mom's okay with, that. So I texted my mom and said, oh, I just wanted to run something by you quickly. Is it okay if I keep this grandmother character, the same name as grandma? And she wrote back right away and said, oh, absolutely. Like, that's no problem. Name the grandmother Sylvia, no problem. So I sort of moved on. And then about 5 minutes later, she texted me back to say, I was thinking, and maybe you should change the name of the character because she's not, we want to make sure it's if you're going to name somebody after grandma, maybe it should be. And I thought she's right. So then I changed it to Cecilia. So that was the only instance where I actually had to change a name, but otherwise, no.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Wow, that's interesting. And it's funny, like you said, that you, besides your Sylvia and Cecilia story, you did not have an intentional story behind any names, but how people are connecting and coming up with just that's very interesting.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I actually, when I was reading, so I liked your chapters were pretty short, and it was very, in a way, easy read, not the subject wise, but you know what I mean. So is that
Yeah.
something you picked up on your previous job? Were you like a editor or something, or as a public Penguin House Canada, Canada, that were you reading scripts like? Because to me it was very smart choice the way you had written the chapters, and it was very easy. So is that something trick that you learned or you liked previously, was something you read? Anything behind that?
Oh yeah, no thanks. Yeah, so I no, I don't think so. When I worked at Penguin Canada, I was publicity director. So I was doing more of the marketing and the publicity, and I never edited anything, or was reading some books on submission, but that wasn't my role. Wasn't on the editorial side. So, but I think for the short, I think there's two sort of reasons for the short chapters. And one is the very simple reason that I really like books with short chapters. And it's not, because it doesn't make for necessarily for an easier reading experience at all, but there is just something about um you know the tightness of the scene, and the details sort of become a little more impactful. Like, if someone is writing a short chapters really well, there is so much that a reader can take away, from those short succinct scenes, and the impact from them. And I just love that feeling of finishing a chapter and just needing the next one. I love that as a reader. So that really just comes from, I think, the kind of book that I love to read. And I
Yes.
don't know if every book I write will always have short chapters, but I think this book also lent itself to that quite nicely. And I think a lot of that probably had to do with the way in which I was writing it, and that was in very short bursts of time. Like I never really, especially in earlier drafts, I mean, I couldn't sit down and write all day, and every day. That just was never a part of my routine. It was always in these, like less than a handful of hours, 2 hours here, 3 hours there, or shorter periods of time. And so I think that maybe that became part of the cadence of the book, in a way.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I definitely enjoyed it. And that, as a reader, I was like, at the night when I closed the book, yes, I finished 10 chapters today.
Yeah. It's very satisfying. It's true.
Very satisfying. So that really worked, really worked. But again, when I was reading this book, so many memories that fled my mind. And actually, I texted both my kids because they were off to
Ah,
college, and they did not know what I was talking about. I said, this book brought so many memories, and they didn't know I was talking about the hard ones.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
But that made me think, like, what is a good mother? Like you said, this
Mm,
book actually breaks so many, like a perfect portrayal of a motherhood by society. There is like a box that a society expects from a mother and from a motherhood, which this book breaks so many, those taboos. And it is, I feel like it's a high time that we have an honest conversation about motherhood, and because everything is not like flowery and rosy, and so many times even at work we talk about that as a women we rarely share the tough
mm,
experience of our life. And I don't know, it's just how we are brought up, or that's how we are just, but this we have this conversation, me, Sabina, and all the other co-worker all the time. And when we share something and they said, I'm going through the same, I had,
mm.
like, so it's, we all go through the same, but we don't talk about this. um, so thank you for opening up the whole door in a conversation about motherhood. And what kind of caught my attention, that when Blythe notices that something's wrong with Violet, actually it took her some time to even
Mhm.
talk to her husband. And even when she did, after some time, Fox did not believe her. Which is another thing. And we always, I feel like, as a society, if your kid does something wrong, we feel pressure as a parent that you're gonna get blamed, or you just take pressure that was it me who did something wrong. So that kind of leads to my question is nature versus nurture. And I know you do give a little bit of background of the tough motherhood of mother and a grandmother of Blythe. So what are your thoughts about the nature versus nurture?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a fascinating topic. And I always love talking about it with people because everyone has a slightly different take on it, I think, based on their lived experience, and based on their family history and their family dynamics and so many other factors. So it's such an interesting topic. And it's something that, I thought a lot about nature versus nurture just going into parenthood, even. It certainly is top of mind when you are a parent and you're watching I mean, I'm sure you've had that experience too, watching your children. I mean, it really becomes this fascinating thing that is there's always sort of in the back of your mind. But even going into parenthood, really interested me that, we as parents, like especially as, mothers, you really have no idea, who your child is going to be. You can't possibly know. And yet I think we all sort of need to convince ourselves that we have, a very healthy level of control and influence, over who those children are going to be. But we don't really know what parts of our nature that will influence a child, or parts of our nature that will be in our child, or parts of our nurture that will influence them. And again, I sort of feel like we sort of convince ourselves of this control that we don't really have. And so yeah, I think that was sort of really something that I thought a lot about, kind of becoming a parent, and now can kind of watch it in my children, my young children, already kind of seeing that and thinking a lot about the ways I'm influencing them and what parts of me they have. And so yeah, so I wanted to sort of go there in this book to sort of look at, one woman's experience of that when she knows that she comes from the history that she does. She knows she comes from a line of women who couldn't find it in themselves to be nurturing in the way that they wanted to be or should have been. And yeah, I wanted to sort of give her that weight on her shoulders, and to sort of see how that would kind of influence her own behavior. But I think, with the nature versus nurture thing, like, there, you alluded to this and what you were saying, but there is this certain amount of responsibility that we feel towards our children with respect to that as well, right? And I think that also is sort of part of the anxiety that Blythe carries is, if she is right about Violet, and this is who this child is, well, then what? Then what is her responsibility to that child, and what is her responsibility to that family? And can that child be changed or not? And is this a part of her history that she's passing along to this daughter? So those were all questions that really interested me. And I think part of that comes from, whenever I sort of see or hear of, a person doing something, unconscionable, in the news or whatever that you read, we have this natural curiosity to wonder about that person's psychology, of course, right? We that is sort of what the news coverage always ends up being about, and sort of the questions that we always ask. But my mind always goes to that person's parents, and not in a judgmental way, but in a curiosity, like in a curious way, to say, like, did they believe their child capable of doing this and behaving in this way? And if they did believe that, when did they know? And what did that look like? How did they find out? And what was the dynamic in that family like? And would they ever say anything to anybody in that family if they really believed that? And what do they owe that child? What do they owe society? Like, there are a lot of really heavy questions there. So it's quite interesting. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. This book would take a very different path. The story would take a very different path, if Fox made room for that truth, made room for that belief that Blythe has. And of course he doesn't, and that is really, really where they fall apart and where the communication falls apart in this family. So there's a lot of different layers there, I think, but it is, and it's a fascinating topic, isn't it? I mean, it's because it applies to each and every one of us. It really does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can each analyze ourselves from that, with those questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But before I open it up to everybody, I just wanted, can you share a little bit about your second book? And after that, what's on your nightstand? Do you want to share what you're
Oh,
reading currently?
sure. No, I would love to. Yeah, I always love talking about that and hearing what other people are enjoying too. So the second book that I'm working on now, it's not a sequel. So a lot of people have asked if it's a sequel. It's not. But so it's a totally different world and different characters. But it explores a lot of the same themes, I think, as the push does. It really explores, motherhood and marriage, and also female friendship. Which the push goes into, of course, with Blythe and Gemma. But this second book sort of explores it in a bit of a different way. And I wanted to just take a look at those themes, but in women's lives who are at a slightly different point. I wanted to look at the lives of women who are, like maybe late 30s or early 40s or mid 40s, who are sort of, you've made a lot of your decisions already about what your life is going to look like, and you're sort of living that life at that point. And there are not a lot of decisions left to be made. You have the partner you have, the children you have, the career you have, the socioeconomic status you have, and what happens when that, that is not making you happy anymore, or when, how can some people seem to make a change at that point in lives and others feel paralyzed by that. So I wanted to kind of explore those themes at that time in life. So it's still going through revisions and a work in process, but that's sort of what's on my mind, kind of writing that book. So we'll see how it turns out.
All right, we'll be waiting for it. And do you want to share
Thank you.
what are you reading, or what's on your nightstand?
Sure. Well, I have a couple books here. I have two here actually that I had on my nightstand that I brought in anticipation that you might ask this. But
Oh, okay.
but this one's a bit this is a bit of a tease because it's not out yet, but it's out in August.
Oh,
And I feel like it would be a great one to put on hold at the library. I'm sure
yeah.
you're gonna have lots of copies of this, but it is
Yes.
Paula Hawking's new book. So she wrote Girl on the Train,
Yeah.
and it's called A Slow Fire Burning. It is really wonderful. So I was lucky to have this advanced copy and just finished it. And it's a story. It is it's a mystery at its heart, and that it almost feels more mystery than thriller to me, in a sense that you're sort of going through the lives of 4 or 5 different characters, sort of trying to figure out how they're all connected and trying to figure out what has happened, which is a murder on a houseboat. And so you are sort of getting the different perspectives of the people that sort of live around there and have seen something.
Mm.
But it has a wonderful storyline of a character named Carla, who is grieving a child, and it has its own real dark thread, this book, and it's just very beautifully written. I think I love to read thrillers or mysteries or books in this category that have beautiful prose as well. It is certainly one thing to be turning the pages, and feeling propelled forward in a novel. But when you feel like that and you're also reading great prose, like that's my favorite kind of reading experience to have. And this book is definitely that. So I highly recommend it, coming out later this summer.
Of course.
And one that you probably have at your library now, that is just so good, is out now. It came out in April, I think, or maybe May, is The First Day of Spring by Nancy Tucker. I don't
Mm.
know if you've heard of this, or maybe you don't have it in your library yet. Did
We
it come
do
out? Maybe.
not, but
Okay, it might have.
yeah, I
Yes,
see
maybe it's
Sabina
come out a little
writing it
later.
down. We'll be getting it.
Really,
She's taking notes.
yes, it's so. I highly recommend this. I think it would be a great. I love this book, and it's a Nancy Tucker. This is her first novel, but she had written a memoir before, I think, about anorexia or an eating disorder. But this book, and I should say Paula Hawkins is a huge fan of this book as well. So if you like Paula Hawkins and if you enjoyed The Push, I feel like you will love this book. It's by Riverhead, which is a wonderful imprint in the US, and it's the story. It's a story that is told from 2 different narratives. So but from the same woman. So we get the narrative of her as an 8-year-old child, and then we get the narrative of her as a grown woman. And this won't be giving anything away because it is in the back copy of the book, but it opens with her as an 8-year-old child killing a young boy, which is obviously a very difficult, concept. But the book really isn't so much about that as it is about how she lives the rest of her life after having done this, and how she is treated, and how she sort of tries to find forgiveness, and her interaction with her previous life and the person she is now. And it's so wonderfully done. The writing is so vivid, and really, it's such a great book. I just highly recommend it. It's funny because some people have said to me, if you wrote a sequel, it would be so interesting to see what Violet's life was like. And I sort of feel like this is that book. This is the book of a child who has done something unthinkable, and
right.
how they sort of have to repent for that for the rest of their lives, and what that looks like. So highly recommend it. It's a great
It'll
read.
be in
Those
our
are the
catalog pretty soon.
Yeah, great. That's great. Those are the two that I've recently read, and also just finished. Who is Maud Dixon? Do you have this, or do you know of this one as well? It's a debut. An
Okay,
excellent mystery as well. It's by Alexandra Andrews. Who is Maud Dixon? Yeah. So those are my favorite reads recently, I would say.
recently. Okay, thanks
Highly
for
recommend.
sharing. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'm gonna now open it up to everybody and see if anybody has questions. So